Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. Today is a very auspicious day. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and today we will begin to learn Hilchos Sukkah. So we're starting a brand new topic. We're going to be learning the halachos of Sukkah, the halachos of Daled Minim. So without further ado, in today's share, Mirz Hashem, we'll be learning Daf Pei Hey Amud Aleph. We begin on the very last line in the Shulchan Aruch on Pei Daled Amud Beis with a new Siman, Siman Taf Reish Chaf Hey Ubai Sif Echad. Here we have one Sif. Says the Mechaber, Basukais Teishvu Shivas Yamim. We have two psukim in the Torah Hakadoshah in Parshas Emor. We have one pasuk that says Basukais Teishvu Shivas Yamim. You should sit in a sukkah for 7 days. And then in the next pasuk it says Ki Basukais Haishavti Es Bnei Yisrael. The Torah Hakadoshah tells you the reason you should eat in a sukkah, the reason you should go live in a sukkah on Sukkot is Ki Basukais Haishavti Es Bnei Yisrael. Because when we came out of Mitzrayim, the Rabbeinu Shalom had us living in Sukkos. And the Mechaber says over here, and he's taking this from the Torah, what does the Torah HaKadoshah mean when the Torah HaKadoshah says that we lived in Sukkos when we came out of Mitzrayim? Heim Anane Kavod. This is a reference to the Anane HaKavod. Shehekifam behem. The Rabbeinu Shalom surrounded us in the Anane HaKavod. Lebal Yakem Sharav Vashemesh. So that we should not be struck, we should not be harmed by the frost and by the heat, by the sun. In the Midbar, we were traveling. It could be bitterly cold at night. It could be excessively hot during the day. And one of the many chasadim that the Rabbeinu Shalom did for us in the Midbar was he surrounded us with the Anani HaKavod. The Anani HaKavod protected us from the cold, protected us from the heat. It also cleaned our clothing. It also leveled out the ground that we walked on. So we had many, many nisim that were performed for us by the Rabbeinu Shalom through the Anani HaKavod, and a sukkah is a zecher to the nisim of the Anani HaKavod. Now it gets a little bit more complicated than that, which we will see in the Mishnah Berurah. So let's take a look right away in the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Aleph, bottom of Pei Daled Amud Beis. Ki basukay sayshafti heim anane hakavod, explains the Chavetz Chaim v'dugma lozeh, and to make a dugma, to make something similar to the Anani HaKavod, Tzivano lasay sukkos, the Rabbeinu Shalom commanded us to make a sukkah, kedei shenizkar noira oisav v'nifla oisav, so that we should remember the great wonders, the awesome wonders that the Rabbeinu Shalom performed for us. Now it's very interesting, and this is going to become more apparent as we continue to learn the Chavetz Chaim here in the Mishnah Berurah. The Chavetz Chaim does not say over here, kedei shenizkar noira oisav v'nifla oisav, that we should remember the Rabbeinu Shalom's nisim befrat, the nace of the Anani HaKavod. He uses a very general lashon over here. We make a sukkah as a zecher to the Anani HaKavod, kedei shenizkar noira oisav nifla oisav, so that we should remember the many various noiros and niflais that the Rabbeinu Shalom performed from us. And I believe he's referring not only to the nace of the Anani HaKavod befrat, but to all of the various nisim of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now let's go weiter and we'll see that. First, the Chavetz Chaim says, even though, as we know, we left Mitzrayim in Chodesh Nisan, so why are we making these sukkahs over here in the month of Tishrei? The Rabbeinu Shalom did not command us to make a sukkah during the month of Nisan, during the spring, because that's the warm season, it's spring, and lots of people are moving out of their houses, going out into the backyard, going out into gazebos, etc., etc., during the warm season. And if we would go out to a sukkah during Nisan, it would not be recognizable that we're doing this to perform a mitzvah. Therefore, Tziva Isanu, the Rabbeinu Shalom, commanded us that we should do this in the 7th month, in the month of Tishrei, Shehuzman Agishamim, which is really the beginning of the rainy season. V'derech kol adam lotzeis misukasei lebeisai, and that's the time when everybody is leaving their sukkah and they're going into the shelter of the house. They're going into a normal house. V'anachnu, while we, yoitzin min habayis, we're going out of the house, leishev basukah, to move into a sukkah. Bazeh, by doing this, mare, we show shehu oisel l'shem mitzvahs Hashem yisbarach, that this that we're doing it l'shem mitzvah. We're doing it because the Rebbeinu Shalom commanded us to do so. Now we have a very interesting piece of Mishnah Berurah here. The Chofetz Chaim says, "V'kosvo ha'achronim," the Achronim write, "Sheyechavein b'yeshivasa," that we should have kavannos when we sit in the sukkah. Shetzivanu HaKadosh Baruch Hu leishev b'sukkah, that the Rebbeinu Shalom commanded us to go live in a sukkah. Zeicher liyetzias Mitzrayim. We go out to the sukkah, and we should have kavanah. Why are we going out to the sukkah? It's a zeicher liyetzias Mitzrayim. It's a zeicher to all of the nisim of the geula from Mitzrayim. V'gam, and also zeicher la'anane hakavod. It's also a zeicher to the anane hakavod shehi kifan oz aleinu, that the Rebbeinu Shalom surrounded us with at that time, lahagein aleinu, to protect us min hasharav v'hashemesh, from the frost and from the sun. So the first thing that you notice over here is the Chofetz Chaim is telling us very clearly that we have to have two different kavannos when we go out to the sukkah. We have to have a general kavanah that this is zeicher l'yetzias Mitzrayim. It's zeicher to all of the nisim of the geula from Mitzrayim, not just the anane hakavod befrat. The second kavanah that we have to have is a very pratiistic kavanah. We have to specifically have kavanah for the nace of the anane hakavod. And this is why I mentioned earlier in the Mishnah Berurah, when the Mishnah Berurah says, Kedei shenizkar noira oisav v'nifla oisav, he's not only referring to the noiros and the niflais of the anane hakavod, he's referring to the noiros and the niflais of the entire Yetzias Mitzrayim. And in a moment we'll discuss where the Chofetz Chaim gets this from. What is this based on? After all, we learned in the Mechaber just now, the Mechaber said, Hey manane hakavod sheikifam behem leval yakim shar v'shemesh. The Mechaber doesn't say anything here about having kavanah for the nisim of Yetzias Mitzrayim. He only mentions the anane hakavod. So where is the Chofetz Chaim getting this from? We'll discuss that in a minute. But before that, I want to read to you a footnote in the Dirshu, another very interesting topic. In Dirshu footnote number 1, he mentions over here, he says, we don't have by very many mitzvahs where the Mishnah Berurah tells us that in order to be mekayim the mitzvah, we have to have kavanah for the tam of the mitzvah. It's only certain mitzvahs that we have that by. So if you read the footnote here, footnote number 1, ubetam adover, as far as the reasoning, shebe mitzvah sukkah yesh lechavein afes tam atzivui, the reason why by the mitzvah of sukkah we have to have in mind the reason, the tam that's behind the mitzvah. V'chein b'mitzvah tzitzis u'tfilin. We find the same concept by the mitzvah of tzitzis and the mitzvah of tfilin. K'mavur b'shulchan aruch la'el siman ches, siv ches v'siman chafei siv hei. Afal pisha b'shar mitzvahs ain't tzarech lechavein. By the other mitzvahs, we don't have to have kavanah for the tam of the mitzvah. Ela she'oises ha-mitzvah l'shem Hashem shetziva la'asoisa. By most mitzvahs, it suffices just to have in mind that we're doing the mitzvah because this is the Ratzon HaBorei. The Rebbeinu Shalom gave us a tzivui to do this mitzvah. That's why we're doing it. We don't have to have the tam in mind. But over here by sukkah and by tzitzits and by tefillin, we have to have in mind the tam of the mitzvah. Why is this? So he says, Kasav la'el, we learned earlier in Takis Siman Ches, Sivkat Yutes, B'Shem Abach, Shebe mitzvahs elu, when it comes to these mitzvahs, Kasva HaTorah es tam tzivuyam beloshain leman. By these mitzvahs we have in the pasuk the word leman. For instance, by tzitzits, leman tizkeru. So in order so that you should remember as kol mitzvahsai, all of my mitzvahs. So the Rebbeinu Shalom says, why did I give you the mitzvah of tzitzis? Excuse me. For a very specific reason. Leman, in order so that you should remember the mitzvahs. So too by sukkah. It says, Leman, in order so that we should remember that pasukah shafti es b'nei Yisrael. So you see that the Torah wants that. Valkein, therefore, Ikar ha-mitzvah v'kiyuma, the ikar of the mitzvah, and the fulfillment of the mitzvah is dependent upon, tolui b'kach, it's dependent upon this inyan, sheyechavein es tam kiyuma, that we should have in mind and we should have intent for the reason of why we're doing this, b'shas asiyas ha-mitzvah, when we do it. Ma she'ein kein b'shar mitzvah shaloi nemer behen laman. Contrast that to most other mitzvahs, where the Torah Kedosha does not say laman. It doesn't say that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us that mitzvah in order so that we should remember something or have something in mind. Nevertheless, if you did not have this intent, kasav b'Mishnah Berurah sham v'kan, the Mishnah Berurah says both here and by Hilchos Tzitzis, sheyotze yedei mitzvah, still b'diavad you are yotze the mitzvah. V'rak shaloikiyam es mitzvah b'shleimusa, however you're not mekayim the mitzvah in its fullness and the proper way. Ukoloshan abach kan, similar to the way the Bach phrases it here, shem loikiven loikiyam es mitzvah ketikuna, you did not fulfill the mitzvah ketikuna in its proper manner, because again, in order to fulfill the mitzvah properly, you have to have the intent that the Torah HaKadoshah told you to have. Leman, in order so that you should remember that by Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Rebbeinu Shalom put us in Ananei HaKavod. That's the whole thrust of the mitzvah. So that's why it's an ikar part of the kavanah. I always like to say over, right now it's slipping my mind who says it, but we say in the Haggadah that by the Ben HaChacham, it says, what do you tell him? You tell him, Ein maftir nachar HaPesach afikomen. Why is it that halacha that you tell him? Why the Chacham? You see, you have a son of Chacham who's asking, why are we doing all of this? What's the point? He wants to understand. So the halacha that you tell him is Ein maftir nachar Pesach afikomen. Why don't you take out a Mishnah Berurah and learn Hilchos Chametz Matzah with him? Why dafke Ein maftir nachar Pesach afikomen? So I remember seeing brought down that Ein maftir nachar Pesach afikomen. The fact that after the afikomen you're not allowed to eat anything else, and you have to have the tam of the matzah shel mitzvah in your mouth. That's one of the only mitzvahs, or perhaps the only mitzvah, that has anything to do with tam, has anything to do with taste. The very first thing that you teach the Ben HaChacham is that you have to know a mitzvah has to have tam. You have to have a batamta mitzvah, not a kalta mitzvah. The way the Yeshiva Zatzal once said in the Shmuz, you could do a kalta mitzvah, you could do a cold mitzvah, that's a mitzvah without any kavanah, a mitzvah without any tam, or you could have a varma mitzvah, a mitzvah that you have kavanah, you have intent, you have an understanding, you know what it is that you're doing. So the truth is that by all mitzvahs, there's an inyan that the mitzvah should be a batamta mitzvah, you should know why you're doing it, you should have the proper kavannos. But over here, by tzitzits, by tefillin, by sukkah, it's an integral part of the mitzvah that you must have the proper kavannos. Okay, now if we go weiter over here in the Chavetz Chaim, the Mishnah Berurah says at the end over here, at the end of Eis Katan Aleph, V'chol zeh lotzes yedei mitzvah ketikuna. This requirement that you should have these two kavannos is only if you want to be mekayim the mitzvah properly. Hadi'eved, but post facto, if you did the mitzvah, if you ate in the sukkah, and you didn't have these kavannos, yotzei, you're yotzei in the mitzvah, kol shekiven lotzeis lavad. As long as you had a basic kavanah that you want to be yotzei in the mitzvah of the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's a ratzon habayre that I should sit in the sukkah, so I went out to the sukkah, I sat in the sukkah, I ate in the sukkah, so you're yotzei in the mitzvah b'di'eved. Now, why is it that the Mishnah Berurah tells me over here that you have to have these two kavanahs? You have to have one kavanah zecher l'yetzias Mitzrayim, and you have to have another kavanah of a zecher to the Ananei HaKavod. Where does he get this from? So the truth is, I think many of us are aware, a famous machlokes in the Mishnah, machlokes Rebbe Eliezer and Rebbe Akiva, why we eat in the sukkah. Rebbe Eliezer holds that we eat in the sukkah zecher l'Ananei HaKavod to remind us of the nisim of the Ananei HaKavod. Rebbe Akiva says that it's a zecher v'sukkos mamish. When the pasuk says ki b'sukkos shafti es b'nei Yisrael, it's not speaking about miraculous, supernatural sukkos of the Ananei HaKavod. It's talking about regular physical sukkahs. The Klal Yisrael went out to the Mitzrayim. They needed to live in something, so they built huts. So the kibasukkah shafti, the sukkah that we eat in, is a zecher not for the Ananei HaKavod. It's a zecher for the sukkahs mamish. That's the machlokes Rebbe Eliezer and Rebbe Akiva. Now, if you take a look in the Torah paskins like Rebbe Eliezer, and I would assume the mechaber over here, when the mechaber says Heim Ananei HaKavod, he's coming from the Torah. The Torah paskins like Rebbe Eliezer that sukkahs is a zecher to Ananei HaKavod. The mechaber follows in the footsteps of the Torah, and he says Heim Ananei HaKavod. Very simple. Now it gets more complicated. Now we have a machlokes, the Bach and the Taz, how to understand this shita of Rebbe Eliezer. The Bach looks at Rebbe Eliezer, and the Bach says, Rebbe Eliezer says we eat in the sukkah as a zecher for the Ananei HaKavod. What does that mean? Is it a zecher? The kavanah that we're supposed to have is a very proteistic kavanah. It's very specific. We make a nace only for that chesed. We make a zecher for the nace of the anani hakavod. Do we have a mitzvah to make a zecher for the nace of the mun? Do we have a mitzvah to make a zecher for the nace of the Be'er Shel Miriam? We don't find Yomim Tovim. Yes, on our Shabbos Suda, we take Lechem Mishnah and we cover it. We put down a board on the bottom and we put a challah dekel on top in order to make a zecher for the mun. But we don't have a Yom Tov, a zecher l'mun. We don't have a Yom Tov, a zecher to the Be'er Shel Miriam. We have Pesach for the rest of the Nisim of Yitzias Mitzrayim. But Vos Epis that we have a zecher specifically for the Anani HaKavod. So the Bach looks at Rebbe Eliezer and the Bach says, no, you're misunderstanding Rebbe Eliezer. Rebbe Eliezer is not saying that you have to make a proteistic zecher for the nace of the Anani HaKavod. What he means is we have to make a zecher for all of the nisim of Yitzias Mitzrayim. And when the Rabbeinu Shalom took us out of Mitzrayim, right away he surrounded us with Anani HaKavod. We know even by the Yam Suf, it says that the Anan went from in front of us, it went behind us, and it caught the arrows, and it caught the Avnei Blistrais, it caught the stones that the Mitzvah was shooting at us from the catapults. So this chesed of the Anani HaKavod was a great chesed that the Rabbeinu Shalom did for us immediately. In the words of the Bach, Tekef, immediately upon leaving Mitzrayim, the Rebbeinu Shalom made us this nace of the Anani HaKavod. So we make a zecher for the Anani HaKavod as sort of like a symbol of all of the nisim of Yitzias Mitzrayim. That's the Bach's understanding of Rebbe Eliezer. The Taz, on the other hand, argues on the Bach. And the Taz says, no, that's not what Rebbe Eliezer says. The Bach says, Rebbe Eliezer says, it's a zecher for the Anani HaKavod. It's a zecher for the Anani HaKavod means pshuto k'mashmai. It's a zecher for the Anani HaKavod. Since the Torah paskins like Rebbe Eliezer, so Torah paskins like Rebbe Eliezer, the Mechaber paskins like Rebbe Eliezer, the Mishnah Berurah came, the Mishnah Berurah sees a Bach and a Taz, and the Mishnah Berurah was machmir like both shitas, and he says in order to be mekayim the mitzvah properly, we have to have both kavannos in mind. We have to do like the Bach, and we have to have kavanah not only for the Anani HaKavod, but for all of the nisim of Yitzias Mitzrayim. We also have to have in mind the Anani HaKavod specifically, the way the Taz learns pshat in Rebbe Eliezer. That's my understanding of the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, now let's go to the top line of Pei Hey Yom and Aleph, to the words of the Ramah. Says the Ramah, "U'mitzvah l'sakin ha'sukkah miyad la'achar Yom Kippur." There's a mitzvah to build the sukkah immediately after Yom Kippur, which I think what the Ramah means here, I'm basing this on the Mishnah Berurah, I think the Ramah means the day after Yom Kippur. Over here, he doesn't mean Matzah Yom Kippur. In the previous Siman, and the Mishnah Berurah is going to reference this, in the previous Siman, at the end of Hilchos Yom Kippurim, we had the Ramah, where the Ramah said, "V'hamedaktikim maschilim miyad b'motzai Yom Kippur b'asiyas HaSukkah." The medaktikim b'mitzvahs, those who want to be very precise in their kiyam ha'mitzvahs, so right after Yom Kippur, Matzah Yom Kippur, they want to go from mitzvah to mitzvah, like the Ramah said, kedei lotzeis mi mitzvah el mitzvah. You want to go right from the mitzvahs of Yom Kippur, you want to go straight into the mitzvahs of Sukkot, and therefore the Ramah said the medaktikim on Matzah Yom Kippur they're maschil. They begin to do something for the sukkah. I've mentioned before, I look forward every year. I come home from Yom Kippur, I go, I make havdalah, I take a drink, and then right away I go out to the sukkah with a broom, I sweep the deck, I try to do something to start preparing for Sukkot. Over here the Ramah is saying something else. Here the Ramah says, "U'mitzvah l'sakin ha'sukkah miyad la'achar Yom Kippur." Immediately after Yom Kippur, you should not just be maschil with the mitzvah. You should go build your sukkah. Right after Yom Kippur, build your sukkah from A to Z. Why? The mitzvah ha'bala yadai al yach mitzena. Because now you came into the season when it's now incumbent upon you to make a sukkah for Sukkot. So you have a mitzvah to take care of. If you have a mitzvah to take care of, you take care of it right away. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's cut and base. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "Mitzvah l'sakin ha'sukkah miyad." After the kvar ksavay le'el b'sayv simen taf reish chav dalid, even though, like I mentioned to you, the Ramah already said at the end of the previous siman that there's an Indian to start working on the sukkah right after Yom Kippur. Hasam balayla haschala ba'alma. Over there, we're just talking about at night, Matzah Yom Kippur, to have some sort of haschala, to do something to start the binyan HaSukkah. V'lamacharas, but on the next day, mesakin kula im efsher. If it's possible, you should build the entire sukkah from A to Z the next day. Gam, furthermore, Sham, over there at the end of the previous Siman, I really Inyan Medaktik B'maisav. Over there, we're not talking about everybody. We're talking about the Medaktik in B'maisim, those who try to be very, very precise in their Kiyam HaMitzvahs. Such a person, Yaschil Devar Ma B'Sukkah Miyad B'Layla. He should start doing something for the sukkah right away at night, Motzi Yom Kippur. Umi she'ein medaktik, but somebody who's not so careful, he's not such a medaktik b'mitzvahs. On him, says the Ramah now in our Siman, I'll call panim b'yom ha'macharas achar yitzia mi beis hakneses l'chol ha'pachas. The next day, the day after Yom Kippur, when you're already done with Yom Kippur, yaschil v'yigmar kula im efsher. If it's possible, immediately you should go build the entire sukkah. Va'afilu hu erev Shabbos ad chatzos. Even if Yom Kippur was on Thursday, so the day after Yom Kippur is erev Shabbos, even on erev Shabbos until chatzos, you could be oisik in building the sukkah. Why does the Mishnah Berurah say over here until chatzos? So the truth is that this is based on a halacha that we had earlier in the beginning of Hilchos Shabbos, Siman Reish Nun Aleph Sif Aleph. We have the halacha brought down by the Mechaber that you're not supposed to do malacha on Erev Shabbos. The lashon over there is Achar Zman HaMincha. After Mincha, after the Zman HaMincha, you're not supposed to do malacha. The Mechaber brings down two Yeshayimrims. Is it Mincha Gedola, which is a half hour after Chatzos, or is it Mincha Ketana, which is a lot later? So, but that's where this is coming from. The Mishnah Berurah is telling me, even though we have a halacha that on Erev Shabbos, somebody who does malacha ain't a roya siman bracha, but even if it's Erev Shabbos, so until Chatzos, you could be Isaac in building the sukkah. After Chatzos, he says, V'achazeh yesh leima da aser. It could be that it's aser after Chatzos. Now, it is funny why the Mishnah Berurah says over here Chatzos, because over there in Siman Reish Nun Aleph we have either Mincha Gedola, which is a half hour after Chatzos, or Mincha Ketana. It doesn't say in Reish Nun Aleph anything about Chatzos, but I do think that there is a Prima Godim, if I'm not mistaken. I think there is a Prima Godim that mentions Chatzos, so perhaps this, and he's basing this on the Prima Godim, so it could be that the sheet of the Prima Godim, I don't remember where the Prima Godim gets it from, but the sheet of the Prima Godim is that you shouldn't do malacha already after Chatzos. Now, I also did see brought down from the Kaf HaChaim. The Kaf HaChaim says that this concept that you should work on building the sukkah on Erev Shabbos is only if all of your tzarchei Shabbos are already prepared. If Shabbos is already ready, the soup is up, the cholent is up, table is set, Shabbos is ready, now you could go work on the sukkah. But if Shabbos is not ready, then we know we have a golden rule, Tadir v'she'enoi tadir kaidim. The mitzvah that comes more frequently gets kedima, it gets preference. And Shabbos is certainly more tadir than sukkah, in which case you would have to work on the tzarchei Shabbos before you would work on the tzarchei sukkah. Okay. Incidentally, whenever we talk about the concept of mitzvah abal yadai al yach mitzena, I always like to mention from my Rebbe, Berurah Feinstein, Lausanne Gesund Stark, Berurah, when it comes to the concept of mitzvah abal yadai al yach mitzena, if you want to see how he takes it, he's usually finished being Marvis Sedra, so he's usually finished Shnayim Mikra ve'echad Targum for the next week before this week's Shabbos is over. What do I mean? We know that the halacha is that you could start Shnayim Mikra ve'echad Targum on next week's Parsha as soon as you laned the Parsha by Mincha of Shabbos, right? Mincha Shabbos afternoon, you laned till Sheni of next week's Parsha. So as soon as you laned until Sheni by Mincha, you could start doing Shnayim Mikra ve'echad Targum for next week. Right away after Mincha, Berurah takes out a Chumash, and he sits down and he starts speaking Marvis Sedra. He's usually finished next week's Parsha before Shabbos is even over. If he's not finished by the time Shabbos is over, then he sits down Motzi Shabbos and he finishes Motzi Shabbos. I once asked him about it. I said, you have a whole week to do Shnayim Mikra ve'echad Targum. He looked at me like I'm crazy. Mitzvah bali yadai ayach mitzana. What do you mean? I have a mitzvah to do right now. So what am I waiting for? The Borei Olam, the Borei Kol Olamim, the Rebbeinu Shel Olam gave me a mitzvah to do. So the Melech comes and the Melech asks you to do it. What do you say? You say, I have plenty of time. The Melech comes and asks you to do something. You take care of it right away. So the Rebbeinu Shalom asked me to take care of something. The Rebbeinu Shalom asked me to be Mavis Sedra, so I should wait. I'm not going to wait. I can start doing it now. I'm going to do it now. I'm going to finish it now. Same thing over here. It's after Yom Kippur. So until Yom Kippur, so fine. You were busy with things. Until Yom Kippur, you were busy with the Yom Noraim. You're busy doing tshuva, I hope. But now, Yom Kippur is over. We're on to the next thing. The next thing is Sukkah. So go build the Sukkah. What are you waiting for? You don't wait until Erev Sukkah. So go build the Sukkah now. They do talk about also the question of why are you waiting until after Yom Kippur to build the Sukkah? Build the Sukkah before Yom Kippur. Why do you have to wait until after Yom Kippur? So there's different, the Mefarshim say different things. Some want to say that you build the Sukkah B'dafka after Yom Kippur in case the Gzeira wasn't such a wonderful Gzeira Chas v'Chalila. Maybe you were Chayiv Golus, or Klal Yisrael was Chayiv Golus. So right away after Yom Kippur, you go out of the house and you start building the Sukkah, and you're Mekayim your Chayiv of Golus in that way, and then the Rebbeinu Shalom will give us a break. And he'll say, I see you're going to do the mitzvah of Sukkah, and you're being Mekayim the Chayiv of Golus that way, I'll go easy on you. Others say that doesn't make sense. In order to be Mekayim Golus, that's actually going out living in the Sukkah. What does that have to do with building the Sukkah? So what's wrong with building the Sukkah before Yom Kippur? So they talk about it in different ways. I just want it to be ma'ur. Okay. Now we go weiter. Now we go to Siman Taf Reish Chavav, Sif Aleph, which is actually a pretty complex sif. I don't think we're necessarily going to finish it today, but we'll make a stab. Sif Aleph begins with the words of the Ramah, not with the words of the Mechaber. Oh, I didn't read the title. Siman Taf Reish Chavav, Ha'isa Sukkah Tachas Ha'ilon Tachas Hagag, the halacha of one who puts up a sukkah underneath a tree or underneath the roof of a house. Ubay Gimel Se'ifim, and here we have 3 Se'ifim. Says the Ramah, Ein la'asoi sukkah tachas bayis or ilon. You cannot make a sukkah underneath a house. Meaning, if you have a very, very large dining room with a nice high ceiling, and you want to go into your dining room and build a sukkah inside your dining room, and you're going to put up completely kosher eschach, you're going to have a wonderful kosher sukkah. The only thing is, it's in your dining room, and it's under the ceiling of your dining room. That, says the Ramah, is no good. Ein lasei sukkah tachas bayis or ilon, nor could you make a sukkah outside in the backyard if you have a tree overhanging the sukkah. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Aleph. What exactly is the problem with this? Why can't you have a sukkah under a tree or under the ceiling of the house? Says the Chavetz Chaim, the halacha is that the sukkah has to be positioned under the open sky. You can't have a chatzitza of some sort between the sukkah and the sky. Tiksiv, this is based on the pasuk which says, Basukais teishvu, you lived in sukkahs, and the word basukais is written chaser vav. It's spelled without the vav. You could have had a vav between the kaf and the saf. Basukais, you could have had a vav in there, but it's spelled chasar without the vav. Tahainu, and we darshan from there, we learn out from there, ba'achas, that the sukkah has to have one schach. It cannot have multiple schachos. It can't have more than one schach. It has to have one schach. Shelo yisaychech aleha b'shnei kiruyin. You should not cover up the sukkah with 2 covers, a schach and then a ceiling, or a schach and then a tree. V'loy b'sukkah shetach sukkah. You can't have one sukkah underneath another sukkah. What that means is, let's say you have a sukkah with completely kosher schach, and then 10 tfachim above that, you have a separate schach. Doesn't matter. Even if that second schach is a kosher schach, now you have 2 schachos. It's not like a thick sukkah. If you had one layer of schach, and then immediately on top of that, or with a short interposition of air space, you had another schach, that would be considered one schach. But if there's a distance between the 2 schachos, I believe it's 10 tfachim, we'll get there, then it's considered a sukkah that's under 2 separate schachos. And that's a problem. That goes against this drasha of basukos teishvu chaser vav, that you have to have one schach, shelo yisuchech aleh b'shtei kiruyin, v'loi b'sukkah shetachas sukkah, oy tachas habayis, oy ilon. Now, the Chavetz Chaim makes reference to another halacha, which I think there are many people who aren't aware of this halacha. I don't know how negeya it is usually, but still in all, it's a halacha. Ubeisai gufa. How about if you want to use your house as a schach? What that means is, let's say you live in some wonderful area where the weather is beautiful all year round. You have a steady 70 degrees and it never rains, even though that would be a big problem if it never rained. But you have a house in some area where you could afford to have a schach on your dining room all year round. You could live all year round in a dining room that in reality is a perfectly kosher sukkah. Kosher walls, kosher schach, everything is fine. And you leave it that way all year round. So you eat in a sukkah all year round. And now comes sukkahs, you say, haha, I'm ahead of the curve. I don't have to go outside and build a sukkah. My dining room is a sukkah. So ubeisai gufa, if you want to use your house itself as a sukkah, afim yirtza leishiv babachag l'shem sukkah, even if you're going to go into the dining room on Sukkot with all of the kavannos that we mentioned, you're going to go into it Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, Zecher L'Anani HaKavod, you're going to do it L'Shem Mitzvah, to be Mekayim the Mitzvah, everything good. You're not Yotzeh. Why? It's puzzle. Why? The Sukkah Amar Rachmana. Because the Torah HaTorah tells us that you have to go out to a Sukkah. V'loi Beisai Shel Kol Yamais Hashana. You can't use your year-round house in order to be Yotzeh the mitzvah of Sukkah. You got to go out to a Sukkah. Now, you'll ask me, how about the people who live in these beautiful houses who have a dining room that has a roof that rolls off for Sukkot, and now it becomes a kosher Sukkah? That's a different story. Before, it wasn't a Sukkah. When you had the roof on, it wasn't a Sukkah. Now you took the roof off, now you made a sukkah. Now you're going out to a sukkah. L'shem it's a sukkah. That's fine. The problem that he's speaking about over here is where your dining room is a sukkah all year round. In that case, you didn't go out to a sukkah. You're eating in your bayis. You're living in your bayis on sukkahs. That's this psul of Sukkah Amar Rachmana. You have to go out to a sukkah. The Torah HaKadosh wants you to go out to a sukkah and not spend sukkahs in your house. Next halacha says the Chavetz Chaim, V'ilon pasol, a tree over a sukkah is pasol, sheyehehu hasoichech al dafnais hasukkah, that the branches of the tree should be the schach over the sukkah. That's a psul mishum demechuberhu, because we know that one of the tanoim, one of the conditions for kosher schach is it has to be min hatolosh. It has to be something that was removed from the ground. If it's mechuber lekarka, it's not kosher schach. Okay, so that was the Ramah. Now let's go into the more complicated Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, if somebody makes his sukkah underneath a tree. Now, before we go weiter, let's take a look at the Bir Halacha right away. Dibra Maschel Tachase Ilon. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Hainu, what does this mean? Kisha Anfei Ha'ilon Hu Al HaSukkah Mamish. When we talk about somebody who makes a sukkah under a tree, it means that the sukkah is actually positioned underneath the branches of the tree. But if the tree and its branches are alongside the sukkah, now maybe your sukkah is 8 feet tall, and maybe this gorgeous oak tree is 50 feet tall. But you used a laser or whatever it is you used, and you went up and you see that the branches of the tree are not positioned over your sukkah. But you have this big, thick tree with thick branches that's positioned right next to your sukkah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Afal Pisha al Yedei Tzelo Ilon, even though your sukkah is in the shadow of the tree, and therefore the sun will never hit your sukkah. Your sukkah will always be in the shade of this beautiful 60-foot tall oak tree. Afilu haki kosher. Your sukkah is still kosher. So what he's pointing out over here is, when the Mechaber is going to tell you that there's a problem building a sukkah under a tree, and we're going to see that part and parcel of that problem is that it invalidates your schach because you're sitting in the shadow of the branches of the tree. You're sitting in the tzeil of the branches of the tree, not in the tzeil of your schach. Well, by the same token, you could make an argument if the oak tree is positioned to the side of your sukkah in such a fashion that it always protects your sukkah from the sun, maybe also you have a problem. Same problem. Kamash Malan, no. The problem is when the branches are positioned over your sukkah, not if they're positioned to the side of your sukkah. So now let's go weiter. So the Mechaber says here, if somebody makes his sukkah under the branches of a tree, there are those that say, if the branches of the tree are very thick, and they're thick to the degree that the shade of those branches would be tzilasai meruba mechamasai, there would be more shade than sun. Now that's the shear of kasher eschach. So if the branches of the tree, now the branches of the tree are pasal eschach, they're mechubal karka. If the branches of the tree provide coverage so that there's more shade than sun, so technically it gives the right amount of shade to be kasher eschach, then according to this Yeshayimrim, psula b'chol inyan. Then this sukkah that's positioned under these branches is pasal b'chol inyan. In every case. Now the Mechaber is going to define right away one thing that he means when he says b'chol inyan, and the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us another one. First the Mechaber says, it's psula b'chol inyan. This sukkah is pasal no matter what. Af im hasukkah tzilasa meruba mechamasa. So, in the case that the Mechaber is outlining, it's like this. He says, if the branches of the tree provide enough coverage from the sun that they are tzilasa meruba mechamasa, it provides more shadow than it allows sunlight to go through, then the sukkah beneath those branches are pasal, even if the sukkah's schach itself also is kosher. The sukkah has schach, that's also tzilasa meruba mechamasa. It doesn't matter. What's the problem here? Since the upper branches of the tree, that upper pasal eschach, is also tzilasai meruba mechabasai, you know what that means? That means that the kosher eschach that you have on top of your sukkah, that's underneath the branches of the tree, they don't do anything. Doesn't accomplish anything. If you would take away that kosher eschach from off the top of your sukkah, you still would have tzilasa meruba mechamasa, but from pasal eschach. So the branches of the tree invalidate your kosher eschach because your kosher eschach is no longer doing anything. In the words of the Mishnah Berurah, in moil klum, it doesn't do anything. Okay, now let's take a look here at the words of the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and bays. B'chol inyan. The Mechaber said, according to this Yeshayimrim, if the branches of the tree give tzilasa meruba mechamasa, then the sukkah that's beneath them is passer b'chol inyan. It's pasal in every case, says the Mishnah Berurah. Ritzayna loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say when he puts in these words, that it's pasal b'chol inyan in every case, he means, afilu im hishpil ha'anofim lamata. Even if you take those branches from the tree and you pull them down to the schach that's on top of your sukkah, the ervan im schach hasukkah, and you mix them in together with your bamboo sticks. So imagine in your mind, you put your sukkah under a weeping willow, and you know the branches of that weeping willow, they're very pliable and they're very movable, but they're pasal because they're mechubal karka, and they give very good coverage. So they're tzilasa beruba mechamasa. So you come up with a chap. You know what you're going to do? You're going to take the branches of that weeping willow, you're going to pull them down to the same level as your bamboo, or as your mats, or as your reeds, whatever you're using as schach, and you're going to kind of blend them in with your schach. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. Uschach hasukkah rova aleihem ve'enei nicker. And you're going to have roiv in your kosher eschach against that pasal eschach. You're going to have so much bamboo that you're going to have a majority coverage of your sukkah is going to be kosher bamboo. And the branches of the weeping willow are going to be so mixed in they won't even be nicker. So now you would say that they're batel b'roiv. What's the problem? Again, my sukkah, I had enough kosher eschach on my sukkah that my sukkah would really be a kosher sukkah. Without these weeping willow branches, I have enough kosher eschach. I have tzilasa meruba mechamasa. What's the problem? The problem is that I also have this tree overhead, and this tree overhead is also tzilasa meruba mechamasa. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do bittul. I'm going to take the branches, I'm going to mix them in with my schach, and I'm going to be mevatel them. They'll be batel b'roiv, and now I'll say that they're kimisha enoi. It's as if they're not here. Maybe that's kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Afilu hachi puzzle. This sukkah is still puzzle. Ta'av shas sukkah tzilasa meruba mechamasa. Because even though your sukkah, even without the weeping willow branches, is tzilasa meruba mechamasa, Kevon sheha'ilon gam kein tzilasa meruba mechamasa, since the branches of the tree give enough coverage that they would also be tzilasa meruba mechamasa, in kain ein schach hasukkah moil klum, then your schach is not accomplishing anything. It's true that you have kosher schach over your sukkah, but your kosher schach over your sukkah is kimisha enoi. It's invalidated because it's as if it's not accomplishing anything. What's it accomplishing? The weeping willow is giving you tzilasa meruba mechamasai. So it's very nice that you tried to be mevatel it, you tried to mix it in, you tried to make bittul b'roiv. The bottom line is your kosher eschach is not accomplishing anything because the puzzle eschach of the tree is already giving you tzilasa meruba mechamasai, and therefore, according to this Yeshayimrim, this sukkah is shot. There's nothing you could do. This sukkah is not salvageable. Okay. So again, I'm just going to read from the beginning, go back to the Mechaber. I'm just going to read from the beginning of the Yeshayimrim. So Yeshayimrim, there is a shita that says, Shema Elon Silasa Meruba Mechamasai. If the branches of the tree give enough coverage that they will create a situation where there's more shade than sun in the sukkah, then Psula B'chal Inyan, then the sukkah beneath it is totally puzzle B'chal Inyan, even if you tried to be Mevatel the Schach puzzle. And even if the schach kosher on your sukkah provides tzilasa meruba mechamasa, it doesn't matter. This sukkah is going to be puzzle because your kosher schach is not accomplishing anything, because the weeping willow is already giving tzilasa meruba mechamasa. Avol, however, continues the Mechaber, ima ilon chamasai meruba mitzilasai. Let's say the branches of the tree are thin, and they don't give enough coverage to be tzilasa meruba mechamasai. So the branches of the tree don't have the shear, they don't have the necessary thickness to provide kosher eschach. The branches of the tree would be chamasa meruba metzilasai. So then the Mechaber says, according to this Yeshayimrim, now it depends. Im hasukkah tzilasa meruba mechamasa b'loy ilan. Let's say the sukkah that you have beneath has plenty of kosher eschach. Your kosher eschach is thick enough on its own. It's tzilasa meruba mechamasa. So the only problem is that above it, you have schach puzzle. You have branches of a tree that are mechuber. So that's schach puzzle. And that schach puzzle is not tzilasa meruba mechamasa. It's chamasa meruba metzilasa. According to this Yeshayimrim, says the Mechaber, kshera. This sukkah would be kosher. Why? Because what's the problem? And the Mechaber continues, and you don't have to make the shtick that I mentioned before of bringing those weeping willow branches down, mixing them with the bamboo and being mevatel them. You don't have to be mevatel them. There's no problem. You have a sukkah that has kosher eschach. Up above it, you have branches of a tree that are puzzle because they're b'mechuber, but they also don't have the shear of schach. They don't provide enough coverage. In that case, according to this Yeshayimrim, we could discount those branches. We could say, Lo yichpat lan klum, doesn't bother us. It's pasal eschach, so what? I don't need it. I don't care that it's here. It doesn't affect me in any way. It's not like the first case. In the first case, you can't discount those upper branches. You know why? Because those upper branches themselves have a shear of schach. So then you can't discount them. They're there. They have the shear of schach. It's like you're making a sukkah under another set of schach, and that set of schach is schach puzzle. It's mechubar l'karka. But over here, it's not schach. It's not thick enough. I could totally discount it, and I don't even have to be mevatel it. Aval, however, this is only if the schach that you have down beneath the top of your sukkah is good on its own. It's tzilasa meruba mechamasa. Aval, however, im eina sukkah tzilasa meruba mechamasa. If the kosher eschach that you have on your sukkah is not thick enough, it's not tzilasa meruba mechamasa, ella al yedei ha'ilan, you need the branches. You need the weeping willow branches in order to have enough schach to be tzilasa meruba mechamasa and have a kosher sukkah. In that case, tzarich sheyashbil ha'anafim. Now you have to take the weeping willow branches, pull them down to your bamboo, v'ya'arvei mimaschach, mix them up with the schach be'inyan shelo yiu nikarim, in such a way that they're not recognizable, v'yehe schach rabba aleihem, and in such a way that your kosher schach has roiv against the mechuber, against the tree branches, umevatlan, and then you could be mevatel them and you could use them. So you hear what this shita is saying? This shita is saying like this. To wrap it up, he's saying, if your sukkah, if the tree branches above create a situation where they have enough coverage that they're tzilasa beruba mechamasai, then there's no way to save the sukkah beneath it. You can't discount that schach, that puzzle of schach of the weeping willow, because it makes tzilasa beruba mechamasai, and therefore the schach, the kosher schach that you have in your sukkah is not doing anything. It's not accomplishing anything. So you don't have schach. All you have is schach puzzle of a weeping willow. So you don't have a sukkah. So in that case, according to this Yesharim, there's nothing you could do. But if the upper schach is chamasai meruba mitzilasai, so now it depends. If your sukkah that's down beneath is tzilasai meruba mechamasai, so you know what? You have a sukkah with kosher schach. It's tzilasai meruba mechamasai. You have schach puzzle up above, but it's chamasai meruba mitzilasai, and therefore we could just discount it. We could pretend it's not there. We don't even have to be mevatel it. But what if the schach kosher that I have on my sukkah is also not good enough? The schach kosher that I have on my sukkah is chamasai meruba mitzilasai. The upper branches, the weeping willow, are also chamasai meruba mitzilasai. But what I want to do is I want to use the schach puzzle. I want to blend the schach puzzle together with my schach and create tzilasai beruba mechamasai. Yeah, but you have a problem. The weeping willow branches are schach puzzle. They're mechuber. So according to this shita, what you could do is take those weeping willow branches, pull them down to the level of your schach kosher, mix them in, have roiv schach kosher against the schach puzzle, so you mevatel them, and now you have a kosher sukkah. Cute. Okay, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah here. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton gimel. Avalima ilan chamasai veruba mitzilasai. If the schach puzzle, if the weeping willow doesn't have sufficient coverage to be kosher as schach, it's chamasai meruba mitzilasai. Da'az hatzeil k'moi she'enoi. So now the shadow provided by the weeping willow branches is bottled to the sunlight. Right? That's always the problem of chamasai meruba mitzilasai. So now your sukkah underneath is not a sukkah shetachas ilan. We could discount the upper weeping willow branches because they're not really giving shade. So we could discount it. So then this Yesharim said that it depends. If your sukkah beneath the weeping willow branches has enough schach kosher, so then we totally discount the branches. It's as if they're not here because of what the Mishnah Berurah just said. They're not providing any shade. They're providing a little shade, but they're only providing a miut of shade. It's chamasai meruba mitzilasai, so the tail is bottled. So then those upper weeping willow branches can be sheinoi. It's if they're not here. Lo yichpat lon klum. I have kosher schach on top of my sukkah. My sukkah down below is fine. But if you need the weeping willow branches, because without the weeping willow branches, you don't have tzilasa meruba mechamasai on your sukkah, so you want to use the weeping willow branches. What the Mechaber wants to say is, and that creates a problem, because how could you use the weeping willow branches? There's schach puzzle to a mechuber. You can't blend in this schach puzzle together with your schach kosher in order to use it. So what do? So then there's a fix, there's a tikkun. Hey, sar sheyashbil. What you do is you bring down that schach low down, you bring it down to the level of your schach kosher. You're going to bring it down, you're going to mix it in so that there's roiv schach kosher. The schach puzzle is not nicker, it's bottled. The schach puzzle is bottled to the schach kosher. You have tzilasa beruba mechamasai, and you have a kosher sukkah. And says the Mishnah Berurah, you can even do this lechatchila. Even if you're making this sukkah on chalamayid, Now the point over here is you're making the sukkah on Chalamayid. On Chalamayid, that schach pasel is really schach pasel. You see, before Yom Tov, it's hard to call it schach pasel. There's no schach before Yom Tov. But on Yom Tov, it's schach pasel. And you don't have a problem of being mevatel iser lechatchila. You're not being mevatel iser. The schach pasel is not iser. It's not like you're trying to be mevatel basa b'chalav in something else. So you're trying to be mevatel iser. Schach pasel is not iser. It's just not usable as schach. Okay, so this was somewhat complex. We'll stop with this V'yei Shomrim. We'll continue with Hashem tomorrow with the next V'yei Shomrim over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. It's beautiful to start learning Hilchos Sukkah with the Olam. The Rabban Shalom, the schus of limud HaTorah should be megan on God's Klal Yisrael. The Rabban Shalom should send Yeshua's refuahs and parnasa to all those in need, and especially during these days of the 9 days coming up to Tisha B'Av, we should be zeichet to see the Bias Goyel Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.